As the stars begin to speckle the velvet night, imagine yourself standing on the banks of a mighty river, its waters whispering secrets of a time long past. The air is warm, carrying the faint scent of date palms and sun-baked clay. Before you lies a land cradled between two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, where the first chapters of human civilization were written. This is Mesopotamia, the cradle of cities, the birthplace of writing, and the heart of ancient wonders. Tonight, we embark on a journey through time, a gentle voyage into the history of this extraordinary land, crafted to soothe your mind and guide you toward restful slumber. Picture the bustling markets of Babylon, where merchants haggle over sacks of barley and shimmering beads from distant lands. Envision the towering ziggurats, their steps reaching toward the heavens, as priests murmur prayers to gods whose names echo through eternity. Feel the weight of clay tablets in your hands, etched with stories of heroes and laws that shaped the world. This is not just a tale of kings and conquests, but a tapestry of human dreams, struggles, and triumphs, woven across millennia. Each moment we explore will draw you deeper into the past, wrapping you in the calm embrace of history's gentle rhythm. This video is designed for those who seek both knowledge and peace, a way to drift into sleep while wandering through the ancient world. The story of Mesopotamia is vast, spanning the rise of Sumer's city-states, the glory of Akkad, the laws of Hammurabi, and the splendor of Nineveh. We'll tread softly through these epics, letting the narrative unfold like a lullaby, rich with detail yet serene enough to ease you into dreams. Whether you're here to learn or to relax, this journey will carry you across the sands of time, where the whispers of ancient voices become a soothing companion for your night. So, settle into your favorite cozy spot, let the day's worries fade, and allow the history of Mesopotamia to guide you into a world of wonder and rest. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the past unfold before you. Hello, this is Sherry, and welcome to my channel. So let's begin. Close your eyes. Let the noise of the modern world fade away, the distant hum of machines, the glow of neon, the endless chatter of now. Drift backward, not by centuries, but by millennia. Back to a time when the earth was still wild and the stars were closer to the minds of men than any god ever would be. Now, picture this. A vast plain stretching endlessly in all directions. The air is warm, still, and golden with dust. To the east, a ribbon of silver water glimmers in the light, the Tigris. To the west, her sister flows, the Euphrates. Between them lies a land ancient peoples would call Eden, meaning the plain. To us, it would be known as Mesopotamia, from the Greek, meaning the land between rivers. This was not paradise, not exactly, but it was the first stage on which the grand drama of civilization was set. The rivers did not flow gently year-round. In the spring, when snowmelt rushed down from the mountains to the north, the waters would swell, often with little warning. They would spill over their banks, flooding fields, drowning homes, and shifting the land like a sleeping giant stirring in its bed. And yet, in this chaos, there was life. When the waters receded, they left behind rich, dark silt, the kind of fertile soil that could make wheat and barley grow in abundance. Where there was food, there were people. And where people gathered, stories began. The earliest settlers came here not with empires in mind, but survival. These were simple communities, perhaps nothing more than scattered villages of reed huts and mud brick homes. They came before history, before writing. We call them the Ubaid people, and they lived close to the rivers, tending crops, taming sheep, and slowly discovering how to make the land theirs. They were not alone forever. Over time, these small villages grew, both in number and in size. And with their growth came something the world had never seen before: cities. The Sumerians would call one of their first and greatest cities Uruk, and its name would echo through time as a symbol of power, invention, and myth. But we are not there yet. For now, we remain in this early time, watching the first embers of civilization flicker to life. You might wonder, why here? Why did humanity choose this volatile, flood-prone region to build its foundations? Because the land gave both challenge and reward. The rivers could be cruel, but they were generous too. They offered water, fish, transport, and the key to agriculture. The unpredictable floods forced the people to plan, to build canals and dikes, to organize. This necessity for cooperation was the seed of governance, of shared ritual, of community. And so, side by side with nature's rhythms, humanity began to write its first sentences, not with words but with actions, digging irrigation channels, planting seeds, baking clay bricks under the sun. The air would have been thick with the scent of wet earth, the smoke of cooking fires, and the soft murmur of early languages, not yet written but deeply felt. We do not know their names. We do not have their songs. But their hands, rough, calloused, worn by soil and sweat, shape the bones of something we all inherit: cities, laws, worship, knowledge. Here, in the cradle between rivers, was where the human story became more than mere survival. It became memory. As we drift gently deeper into this tale, imagine yourself walking beside one of those early riverside settlements. The sun is setting, casting long shadows across rows of reeds. You pass a woman grinding barley into flour on a flat stone. A child laughs as he chases a goat through a dusty alley. In the distance, smoke curls lazily from a thatched roof, and the scent of flatbread fills the air. There are no kings yet, no great ziggurats rising to the heavens, no armies or law codes carved in stone. But there is something powerful in the quiet determination of these people, a willingness to adapt, to shape the wild into something lasting. Soon they would discover clay not just as a tool for making pots, but for something miraculous. By pressing a sharpened reed into its surface, they would begin to record. Not thoughts or poems, not yet, but numbers, tallies, lists of sheep, jars of oil, baskets of grain. The dawn of writing began not in the heart of poetry, but in the logic of trade. But that is a tale for another night. For now, let the river guide you. Let its waters lull you with their ancient rhythm. Let your breath match its flow, gentle, slow, eternal. This was the world before time had names, before history had lines in books, before empires were born and gods demanded temples. And yet, even now, you can almost hear the heartbeat of something greater stirring beneath the earth. In the silence after sunset, the wind carries whispers across the fields of something coming. A city, a king, a dream carved in clay. But first, the Sumerians. The stars still glimmer softly overhead, and the land between the rivers slumbers in a warm, earthen hush. But somewhere, just beyond the veil of night, a new sound begins to rise, not the howl of jackals or the distant call of owls, but something new. A human rhythm, the steady thump of a mallet shaping sun-baked bricks, the creak of wooden carts pulled across dusty roads, the hum of 1,000 footsteps moving through narrow alleys. The first city is waking. This is Uruk, the shimmering jewel of ancient Sumer, the place where civilization first drew breath. By the year 3500 BCE, Uruk had become something the world had never known. A city of tens of thousands, with towering walls, crowded streets, temples reaching toward the heavens, and a society structured not around the family or the tribe, but something much larger, the shared identity of a city-state. Uruk was not alone. Across Sumer, other cities began to rise like earthen stars along the floodplain: Eridu, Lagash, Nippur, Ur. Each was independent, ruled by its own priest-king and guarded by its own gods. They competed for resources, prestige, and power. But together, they formed a constellation of human innovation the world had never seen. The land of Sumer, in what is now southern Iraq, was flat and wide, with little stone or timber. Yet the Sumerians were not deterred. With only mud, water, reeds, and fire, they constructed everything from humble homes to vast temples. They invented techniques of irrigation that turned swamps into farmland, redirected rivers, and made the desert bloom. It was in these cities that the wheel was first used for transport, that bronze was forged by mixing copper with tin, that temples became places not just of worship, but of administration and economy. And at the center of every city stood the great ziggurat, a massive, terraced structure made of mud brick. It rose in stages toward the sky, a kind of man-made mountain in an otherwise flat land. The Sumerians believed the gods lived atop these sacred towers. The ziggurat was not a place for the common worshiper, but a stairway between earth and heaven, where priests performed rituals to ensure harmony between mortals and the divine. Sumerian society was deeply hierarchical. At the top stood the Lugal, a term meaning big man, who was both king and general. Below him were priests, scribes, merchants, and artisans. Farmers formed the base of the social pyramid, laboring to grow barley, onions, dates, and lentils under the watchful eye of temple officials. Then there were the slaves, not always born into bondage, but often debtors, prisoners of war, or people sold into servitude by desperate families. They were not forgotten in records, nor in daily life. They were part of the rhythm of the city, their hands shaping much of what would endure. One of the most profound inventions of the Sumerians was their writing system, cuneiform. Imagine a flat slab of clay, moist and waiting. A scribe presses a sharpened reed into the surface, making wedge-shaped marks, first from right to left, then down in neat rows. At first, this script was used purely for economic records, tracking barley rations, livestock, temple inventories. But over time, writing became something more. It began to record myths, prayers, treaties, dreams. It became a voice for the past to speak to the future. The city of Uruk alone employed thousands of scribes, each trained in temple schools called adubas, or tablet houses. These were not simply schools. They were the very engine rooms of the state. Every field, every transaction, every offering to the gods, all was written down. And from this written word came something new, history. As the Sumerians looked to the heavens, they saw more than stars. They saw patterns, omens, stories. They named the constellations, charted the movements of Venus and Jupiter, and developed a lunar calendar based on 12 months. Their observations laid the foundation for future astronomy, long before telescopes or mathematics as we know them. They were also deeply religious, yet pragmatic in their faith. Each city had its patron deity, Inanna of Uruk, Enlil of Nippur, Enki of Eridu. These gods were not distant, but ever-present forces walking among men in stories, guiding the fate of kings, dwelling in statues carefully washed and fed by temple priests. To live in Sumer was to live within a cosmic order. When that order was disturbed by war, drought, or famine, it was believed the gods were displeased. Great care was taken to honor them with offerings, festivals, and ritual purity. But the cities were not always at peace. Sumer's fragmented nature meant that war was frequent. City fought city over water rights, land boundaries, or divine prestige. Yet even in conflict, records were kept, treaties were signed, and the memory of the past was preserved. Still, this golden age of Sumer was fragile. The soil, over-farmed and over-irrigated, began to suffer. Salt crept into the fields, reducing yields. The growing complexity of city life strained resources. And from the north, a new power would soon rise, Akkad, under a man named Sargon, who would do what no Sumerian king ever could: unite the land under one rule. But before we meet him, pause here and take a moment to imagine Uruk at its height. The sun rises over the plain, turning the ziggurats bricks to gold. The river sparkles as boats bring goods from distant lands: lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, silver from Anatolia. In the marketplace, a scribe negotiates with a merchant. In the temple, a priest murmurs a prayer to Inanna, goddess of love and war. This is not merely a city. This is a miracle built from mud, dream, and memory. And though the winds of time will one day wear down its towers and scatter its people, Uruk's heartbeat will echo still in every city that followed, in every line ever written. But the gods of Sumer had other plans yet, and a king was about to rise whose name would reach the stars. As the morning mist drifts across the plains of Sumer, and the golden sunlight catches the peaks of the ziggurats, we now step softly into the world of the gods. Not distant deities residing in the skies, but living, breathing presences who walked among the people, demanding loyalty, gifts, and ritual, and offering protection, wisdom, and fate in return. To understand ancient Mesopotamia is to understand that religion was not a part of life, it was life. The gods were everywhere, in the rivers that brought water, in the storms that lashed the fields, in the stars that charted the passing seasons, and in the very bricks that built the cities. Every grain harvested, every tablet inscribed, every war waged, all was under the gaze of the divine. Each city-state in Sumer had its own patron deity. Uruk was the domain of Inanna, goddess of love, war, and fertility, fierce and radiant, both nurturer and destroyer. Nippur was sacred to Enlil, the god of air and king of the gods. Enki, the clever god of water and wisdom, watched over Eridu, and Udu, the sun god and lord of justice, ruled from the city of Larsa. These gods were not remote or abstract. They had personalities, moods, and expectations. They could be generous, and they could punish. Inside the towering ziggurats, those stair-stepped temples that loomed over every city, the gods were believed to dwell. Not in spirit only, but in physical form. A statue of the god, crafted with painstaking reverence and elaborate ceremony, would sit within the sanctuary, receiving food, drink, music, and offerings. It was washed, dressed, and even entertained. The priests were not simply caretakers of the temple. They were the earthly servants of the divine, maintaining cosmic balance through ritual precision. But the temples were more than houses of worship. They were also centers of administration, storage, and control. Grain was collected and redistributed by temple officials, taxes were recorded, festivals planned, and law enforced, all under divine authority. To defy the temple was not just to rebel against the state, it was to offend the gods themselves. Inanna, in particular, held a unique place in the Sumerian imagination. She was both beautiful and terrifying. Myths tell of her descent into the underworld to confront her sister Ereshkigal, goddess of death, a harrowing journey that symbolized the cycles of fertility and renewal. She was a lover and a warrior, a weaver of fate and a breaker of kings. Her temple in Uruk, the Inna, was among the most sacred places in the ancient world, a complex of shrines, courtyards, and storehouses buzzing with activity. To be Sumerian was to live in conversation with these divine beings. Through prayer, omen reading, dreams, and ritual, people sought their guidance. A priest might interpret the shape of smoke from a sacrifice, the entrails of a sheep, or the position of the stars. Nothing was random, everything had meaning, and that meaning came from the gods. The pantheon was vast. There was Nanna, the moon god, gentle and watchful. Ninurta, a warrior deity of thunder and courage. Ninhursag, the mother goddess, guardian of life and soil. And always behind them, the Anunnaki, the great assembly of gods who met in council to decide the fate of humanity. Even the creation of the world was a divine drama. In Sumerian myth, the universe began as a watery chaos, from which arose the primordial gods. They created the heavens and the earth, and finally humankind, not out of love or benevolence, but to work the land and serve the gods. Humans were made to relieve the gods of labor, to maintain their temples, and to sustain the divine order through worship. This sense of service and devotion permeated every part of life. Festivals were held in great public squares, with music, dancing, and offerings. Statues were paraded through the streets. Kings were crowned not by the will of the people, but by the blessing of the gods, confirmed through omens and sacred rituals. The divine was even written into the laws. When a city was conquered or a treaty made, it was said to be under the will of the gods. When misfortune struck, a failed harvest, a plague, a military defeat, it was interpreted as divine displeasure. The gods were to be feared as much as they were loved. And yet, despite this reverence, the myths also show a very human relationship with the gods. There were stories of gods arguing, falling in love, growing jealous, or making mistakes. These were not perfect beings beyond understanding. They were reflections of the Sumerians themselves, powerful, emotional, proud, and bound by duty. In this deeply spiritual world, the veil between human and divine was thin. A priestess might dream of a god and carry his child. A king might claim to be chosen by the divine to restore justice. A farmer might leave the first sheaf of barley on an altar, believing it would bring rain. It was a world full of presence, a sacred landscape where every hill, tree, and river held meaning. And as the cities grew, the gods grew with them. The myths deepened, the rituals expanded, and the idea of divine kingship, that rulers govern not by might alone, but by divine mandate, began to take root. This idea would change the course of history. Soon, a man would rise who claimed more than favor from the gods. He would say that he had been chosen by them to rule not just one city, but all. His name was Gilgamesh. Now the winds carry us to a city at its height. Uruk, mighty and magnificent, stands like a crown upon the Mesopotamian plain. Its walls stretch for miles, thick and tall, built of baked clay and human will. The sun strikes its ziggurats, and the city glows like bronze in the morning light. And at its heart, a king. He is not merely a ruler, but a legend walking. 2/3 divine and 1/3 man, born of a mortal father and a goddess mother. His name is Gilgamesh, the first great hero in recorded human history. His deeds echo not only through clay tablets, but through the very marrow of civilization's memory. The Epic of Gilgamesh is more than a tale. It is the oldest surviving story ever written, carved onto 12 clay tablets in elegant cuneiform, preserved for over 4,000 years. And within it lie the fears, hopes, dreams, and questions of ancient Sumer. Gilgamesh, at the beginning of his tale, is no humble shepherd of men. He is strong beyond comprehension, wise beyond years, and unbearably proud. His tyranny weighs heavily on the people of Uruk. He works them like beasts, takes whom he pleases, and fears no god nor man. So the gods, hearing the cries of Uruk's people, craft a rival, a wild man named Enkidu, born of clay and wilderness, raised among gazelles and untouched by civilization. He is the mirror of Gilgamesh, his equal in strength, but pure, untouched by the corruption of kingship. When the two finally meet, they clash with the fury of storms. Their battle shakes the very stones of Uruk. But neither triumphs. Instead, something greater is forged in the dust. Friendship. A bond deeper than blood, more enduring than empire. Together, Gilgamesh and Enkidu embark on quests that take them beyond the safety of city walls. They travel to the cedar forest, realm of the gods, to slay the fearsome guardian Humbaba. Their goal is glory, but they trespass into divine lands, and the act sets a chain of consequence into motion. When they return triumphant, the goddess Inanna, or Ishtar, as she would later be known, offers herself to Gilgamesh. But he, still full of pride, refuses her, mocking her many loves. Enraged, she sends the bull of heaven to punish Uruk. Again, the friends prevail, slaying the divine beast. But the gods will not be mocked forever. They decree that Enkidu must die, and soon the wild man falls ill. His death is slow, painful, and unjust. And for the first time, Gilgamesh is broken. He who feared nothing now trembles before a truth even kings cannot escape: death. Haunted by the loss of his friend, and terrified of his own mortality, Gilgamesh leaves Uruk behind. He wanders deserts, crosses mountains, and braves dark seas in search of Utnapishtim, the immortal survivor of a great flood, a man granted eternal life by the gods. This flood, as told in the epic, bears remarkable resemblance to the later story of Noah. The gods, angry with mankind, unleash a flood to destroy the world. But Utnapishtim, warned by the god E, builds a massive boat, saves animals and family, and survives the deluge. For his obedience, he is made immortal. Gilgamesh finds him at the edge of the world and begs for the secret of life everlasting. But the answer he receives is not what he hoped. Utnapishtim tells him that death is part of the human design, that the gods kept immortality for themselves. He offers Gilgamesh a test: stay awake for 7 nights to prove his worth. But exhaustion overtakes the hero, and he fails. Even mighty Gilgamesh is only human. Still, he is offered one last chance, a magical plant that can restore youth. But as he journeys home, weary and worn, a serpent steals it from him while he sleeps. He returns to Uruk empty-handed, and yet something has changed. Gilgamesh looks upon his city, the shining walls, the bustling markets, the temples that pierce the sky, and for the first time he understands. Immortality is not in the body, but in what we build, in the lives we touch, and in the stories we leave behind. The epic ends not with triumph, but with reflection. The journey of Gilgamesh becomes our journey, his fear our fear, his loss our loss, and his wisdom, hard-earned and heartfelt, a whisper from the ancient past that still speaks to us now. For thousands of years, this tale was forgotten, the tablets buried beneath sands and ruins. It was not until the 19th century that archaeologists, digging among the shattered libraries of Nineveh, unearthed the epic. And as scholars slowly translated the ancient signs, humanity rediscovered its oldest story, a mirror held up to time. There is something both humbling and comforting in that. That 4 millennia ago, someone, perhaps by the flickering light of an oil lamp, pressed a stylus into wet clay, telling the story of a man who feared death, who lost his friend, who sought something greater than himself. And that you, listening now in the quiet of night, can hear his footsteps echo still. The world would never again be the same after Gilgamesh. His story laid the foundation for heroes to come, from Achilles to Odysseus, from Moses to King Arthur. But in Mesopotamia, his tale was more than legend. It was legacy. And the city he ruled, Uruk, would soon face a new force, not born of the gods but of ambition. A conqueror was coming, a man not content with a single city. His name was Sargon, and he would forge the first empire the world had ever known. As the shadow of Gilgamesh fades into the mists of myth and memory, the world of Mesopotamia enters a new and turbulent age, one not of gods and legends, but of steel, ambition, and empires. The age of Sargon of Akkad. Before Sargon, the cities of Sumer were like stars scattered across the night, brilliant, but divided, each shining with its own light. They were governed by local kings and priesthoods, linked by language and trade, yet locked in endless cycles of rivalry. No one man had ever dared to unite them. No one had ever succeeded, until him. But who was Sargon? He was not born into royalty. In fact, his origins were humble, perhaps even obscure. Legends tell that he was the child of a temple priestess, his father unknown. Abandoned as an infant, he was placed in a basket of reeds and set adrift upon the Euphrates River. A gardener found him, raised him, and in time the boy grew to serve the king of Kish as a cupbearer, a lowly but trusted position. This echo of a child in a basket may remind you of Moses, or of Romulus and Remus. Myth has a way of gathering around greatness, yet Sargon was no mere servant. He was clever, charismatic, and bold. And in time, he seized power not just of Kish, but of all Sumer. Through military genius, diplomacy, and sheer will, Sargon founded a new city, Akkad. And from this capital, he launched a conquest that would reshape the world. He marched his armies across the fertile plain, subduing city after city, Uruk, Nippur, Lagash. One by one, the old Sumerian cities bowed to him. But Sargon did not stop at Sumer. He pushed north into Assyria, east into Elam, and west toward the Mediterranean, bringing distant lands under a single rule. For the first time in human history, a true empire had emerged, a realm of multiple peoples, languages, and gods, all governed by a single ruler. He called himself king of the 4 quarters of the world. This was not empty boasting. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the mountains of Anatolia. Trade routes were secured, roads were built, armies were stationed in every province. Governors, loyal to Akkad, administered faraway cities. And everywhere his image was carved into stone, his name pressed into clay. But how did he rule such a vast and diverse land? Sargon understood that control was not only won with swords, it was maintained with systems. He standardized weights and measures, appointed military commanders, and most crucially, used language as a tool of unity. Though Sumerian remained the sacred language of temples and rituals, Sargon elevated Akkadian, a Semitic tongue, as the official language of administration. This linguistic shift was profound. It signaled the blending of cultures and laid the foundation for the Mesopotamian world to come. He also knew the power of propaganda. In inscriptions, Sargon declared that he was chosen by the gods, that he never lost a battle, that he brought peace and prosperity. Statues of him stood tall in conquered cities, not only as warnings, but as symbols of strength and divine favor. And yet the empire was not built on fear alone. Sargon promoted economic growth, encouraged agriculture, and expanded irrigation. Under his reign, markets thrived and cities flourished. It was a time of order in a land that had known centuries of chaos. But no empire is eternal, and even Sargon, mighty as he was, faced rebellion. The unity he forged was always fragile, a quilt stitched from many peoples, each with their own customs and gods. Toward the end of his life, revolts broke out. Cities he had conquered rose up. Even the south, Sumer itself, seethed with unrest. Still, Sargon held the reins. He died, it is said, after 56 years of rule, an astonishing reign for any age. He was succeeded by his sons, and later his grandson Naram-Sin, who would carry the Akkadian Empire to even greater heights, but also steer it toward hubris. Naram-Sin declared himself a living god, the first Mesopotamian king to take divinity for himself. He wore the horned crown, a sacred symbol once reserved only for gods, and inscribed his titles as King of the Four Quarters and God of Akkad. For a time, his power was unshakable. He expanded the empire further and crushed rebellions with ruthless force. The famous victory stele of Naram-Sin shows him ascending a mountain, trampling enemies beneath his feet, as divine stars shine down upon him. But even gods fall. A great enemy arose in the distant mountains, the Gutians, fierce tribes from the Zagros range. They descended upon the empire, swift and merciless, exploiting its weaknesses and fracturing its unity. The roads grew dangerous, cities were cut off, trade collapsed, and as Naram-Sin's successors faltered, the empire crumbled. Akkad, the proud capital, faded from the earth. To this day, its exact location remains unknown, swallowed by time, its ruins lost beneath sand and soil. Yet the memory of Sargon endured. He became a symbol of greatness, a king whose legend outlived his city. For centuries afterward, Mesopotamian rulers would invoke his name, seeking to match his glory. His system of governance, his military strategy, his vision of unity, all would influence the empires to come. And so, from a child in a basket came an empire that stretched across the known world. But as Akkad fell, a flicker of renewal stirred in the old cities of the south. Sumer was not finished yet. In the coming centuries, under new rulers and new ideas, the cradle of civilization would bloom again, this time not in conquest, but in wisdom. And in a city called Ur, a king named Ur-Nammu would carve into clay the first true code of laws. As the dust of the fallen Akkadian Empire settled over the plains of Mesopotamia, a strange calm returned to the land. The fierce Gutians, though victorious, were not builders. They raided, they ruled in scattered pockets, but they did not plant roots. And from beneath the ash of conquest, the old Sumerian cities stirred once more. In the city of Ur, nestled close to the edge of the southern marshlands, a new light flickered to life, one that would not burn with the fire of empire, but with the glow of wisdom. The man who lit it was named Ur-Nammu. He was not a warrior king, though he could command an army. He was not a god king, though he claimed the favor of the divine. Ur-Nammu was something else, a lawgiver, a man who believed in the power of order, in the weight of justice, and in the quiet strength of structure. In the year 2112 BCE, Ur-Nammu founded what would come to be known as the Third Dynasty of Ur, often referred to as the Neo-Sumerian Renaissance. It was a revival not only of political control, but of culture, language, and faith in human reason. And central to that rebirth was the creation of something utterly revolutionary, a written code of laws. Before Ur-Nammu, justice was dispensed by kings or priests at their discretion, often influenced by custom, ritual, or the unpredictable moods of power. But Ur-Nammu saw a different path, one that bound the king as much as the commoner. He ordered that justice be laid out in writing, for all to see. The Code of Ur-Nammu, carved into clay in the Sumerian language, is the earliest known legal code in human history, predating even the more famous laws of Hammurabi by centuries. The laws were written in clear, structured form, beginning with a prologue that called upon the authority of the gods. Ur-Nammu, mighty king, king of Ur, king of Sumer and Akkad, by the command of Inanna, the moon god, and Udu, god of justice, established equity in the land. Then came the laws themselves, practical, precise, and deeply human. Where previous disputes may have ended in vengeance, Ur-Nammu's laws emphasized compensation and fines, rather than mutilation or death. If a man caused injury to another, he paid silver. If he falsely accused someone, he faced a fine. Only in the most serious cases, such as murder, robbery, or rape, did the penalty escalate to execution. This marked a profound shift. Law was no longer an instrument of wrath. It became a tool for balance, a way to stabilize society, reduce chaos, and remind both ruler and ruled of their shared obligations. Imagine a merchant in Ur's busy market, protected now not by fear of his king's whim, but by a written law that even the king himself was bound to uphold. Picture a farmer settling a land dispute not with fists, but with clay tablets and legal witnesses. Ur-Nammu's reforms laid the foundation for a bureaucratic state, one supported by scribes, courts, judges, and administrators. His government oversaw land allotments, managed irrigation, collected taxes, and regulated temple activities. This was no longer a collection of loosely linked city-states. Under Ur-Nammu, Sumer moved closer to becoming a unified civilization governed by reasoned law. And his city, Ur, blossomed under his rule. The sacred city became the crown jewel of Mesopotamia. Its great ziggurat, a stepped pyramid rising high into the southern sky, was rebuilt with meticulous care, honoring Nanna, the moon god. The people of Ur believed Nanna watched over them at night, casting silver light upon the city, protecting it from harm. By day, the streets bustled with traders and scribes, potters and priests. Clay tablets filled the libraries, recording not just laws, but hymns, myths, trade records, and school exercises. Music echoed from temples. Scribes taught young students to master cuneiform, the sacred script of the land. For a time, there was peace. Ur-Nammu died in battle, perhaps defending the frontiers of his hard-won order, but his son, Shulgi, took up the crown. And Shulgi, a man of both military might and literary ambition, expanded upon his father's work. He standardized weights, created a network of roads and rest stations, and wrote royal hymns praising his own greatness. But even as he built upon his father's laws, the memory of Ur-Nammu lingered. He had done something few rulers ever achieve. He gave his people not just security, but structure, not just rule, but justice. The code of Ur-Nammu would influence later codes, including that of Hammurabi centuries later in Babylon. But none could take away the honor of being the first. And so we pause here on the banks of the Euphrates, in the heart of ancient Ur. We picture the clay tablets freshly pressed, still warm from the scribe's hands. We hear the call of the market, the low chant of a temple prayer, the steady rhythm of a city that believes, at least for a moment, that the world can be made fair. And yet, history is rarely so kind for long. Soon, from beyond the horizon, a new city would rise, one with ambitions even greater than Ur. A city of gardens and gods, of walls and wonders. A city called Babylon. As Ur's ziggurats basked in the pale silver light of Nanna, and the code of Ur-Nammu whispered justice across the southern plains, winds of change once again stirred in the heart of Mesopotamia. Far to the north, nestled along the banks of the great Euphrates River, a once insignificant town began to stretch upward like a sapling craving the sun. That town was called Babylon. At first, it was little more than a provincial outpost, a small trading hub, hemmed in by stronger neighbors, barely worthy of mention in the grand legacy of Sumer or Akkad. But fate, it seems, had other plans. Over time, Babylon grew in power and wealth. Its walls thickened. Its temples rose, and its people, speaking the now-dominant Akkadian tongue, began to dream of greatness. Then, around the year 1792 BCE, a young king named Hammurabi ascended the Babylonian throne. He was not born into an empire. When Hammurabi began his rule, Babylon was just one of many city-states competing for dominance in the fractured remains of the Sumerian and Akkadian worlds. The land was divided. Alliances shifted like sand, and the memory of Ur's justice flickered faintly, almost forgotten. But Hammurabi was patient. He spent the early years of his reign consolidating power quietly, strengthening Babylon's infrastructure, improving irrigation, and building diplomatic relationships. He was a master of both strategy and timing. Then came the wars. In a series of brilliant and deliberate campaigns, Hammurabi defeated rival kings one by one. Larsa, Inanna, Mari, all fell. Even the once mighty Assyria was brought to heel. Within a few decades, Babylon stood unchallenged. And so began the first true Babylonian empire, with Hammurabi as its architect. But Hammurabi did not want to be remembered only as a conqueror. He sought something greater, something eternal. Like Namu before him, he would use power not only to subdue, but to civilize and to define justice itself. And so he gave the world the Code of Hammurabi. Carved into black basalt, standing nearly 8 feet tall, the Stele of Hammurabi is more than a legal document. It is a monument to order, a declaration that the king was not just a ruler of men, but a servant of the gods' justice. At the top of the stele, Hammurabi is depicted standing before Shamash, the sun god and divine judge. Shamash hands him a rod and a ring, symbols of authority, not military might, but legal command. It is from this divine encounter that Hammurabi derives his right to rule and to legislate. The code itself contains 282 laws, inscribed in precise Akkadian cuneiform. And unlike Namu's earlier code, Hammurabi's laws are strikingly detailed, covering every facet of daily life, from trade and marriage to theft, contracts, debt, and even surgical malpractice. Some laws are astonishingly specific. If a builder builds a house for a man and does not make its construction sound, and the house collapses and kills the owner, that builder shall be put to death. Others reflect a complex economy. If a merchant gives grain on loan, he shall receive interest at the rate of 33 and 1/3% annually. Still others show a harsh sense of justice. If a man puts out the eye of another man, his eye shall be put out. It is from such laws that we derive the famous phrase, "an eye for an eye." To modern ears, some of these laws may sound brutal. But to the people of Hammurabi's Babylon, they offered clarity. They could see what was expected, what was forbidden, and what consequences followed. For perhaps the first time in history, law had become predictable, consistent, and, crucially, public. The stele was placed in temples, visible to all, even if few could read it directly. Its presence was symbolic. Justice is not hidden. It stands in the open, carved in stone. But Hammurabi's vision extended beyond legal codes. Under his rule, Babylon flourished. The city was a wonder of the ancient world, not yet the Babylon of hanging gardens, but already a center of culture, mathematics, and astronomy. Scribes copied sacred texts. Priests studied the movements of stars. The libraries swelled with knowledge. Babylon became not only a capital of power, but a beacon of order and learning. Hammurabi ruled for over 40 years. By the time of his death, his empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Zagros Mountains and westward toward Syria. And while empires are fragile things, his would weaken under his successors. His legacy in law would endure for millennia. Even in ruins, the stone stele of Hammurabi would outlive its empire. Buried beneath the sands, it would wait patiently for over 3,000 years until French archaeologists unearthed it in 1901 in the ancient Elamite city of Susa, where it had been taken as war booty. Today, it stands in the Louvre Museum in Paris, a silent, obsidian witness to humanity's earliest struggles to define right and wrong. But the story of Babylon does not end with Hammurabi. The city, reborn again and again, would later become the jewel of the Near East. Under Nebuchadnezzar, it would reach new heights. Gardens would hang from stone terraces, and its gates would shimmer with blue-glazed brick. And from its scholars would come the first hints of astronomy, of algebra, of stories that would echo into the scrolls of Genesis and Revelation. But before we ascend to those heights, let us rest in this moment, under the calm shadow of Hammurabi's black stele, where the idea of law not as wrath, but as order first took root. Let the fires in the temple burn low. Let the scribes finish their work. Let Babylon sleep for a night while the stars keep watch overhead. For in our next journey, we will wander into the more mystical currents of Mesopotamian thought, where kings ruled cities, but gods ruled fate. When night descended over Babylon, it was not a mere absence of light. It was a return to a time when stars were not just distant suns, but divine watchers, each one a soul, a god, or an omen. In the silence between city walls and ziggurat stairs, the Mesopotamians looked upward and did not see chaos. They saw a heavenly order, structured, storied, and deeply alive. The world of ancient Mesopotamia was ruled not only by kings and law, but by a vast and intricate pantheon of gods. And to understand this civilization, its fears, its hopes, its rituals, one must walk first among its deities. At the heart of their belief was the idea that the universe was not made for man, but man was made to serve the gods. The great creation myth of the region, known as the Enuma Elish, begins not with humans, but with cosmic struggle. In the beginning, there was only the freshwater god Apsu and the saltwater goddess Tiamat. From their mingling came other gods, younger, noisier, more ambitious. The chaos that followed echoes the turbulence of rivers during flood season. Apsu, weary of the younger gods' noise, sought to destroy them. But he was slain by the god of wisdom. Then, in wrath, Tiamat created an army of monsters to avenge Apsu's death. From this battle emerged Marduk, the hero god of Babylon. Marduk offered to defeat Tiamat, but only if he were made king of the gods in return. The gods agreed. Marduk fashioned a net, caught Tiamat, and split her body in two. From one half he made the sky, from the other the earth. From the blood of one of her monster generals, Kingu, he fashioned humanity, created not in divine image, but to carry out the labor of the gods. This myth is central to Babylonian theology. It explains not just the origin of the world, but humanity's place within it. People were servants of the divine order, and the king, acting as high priest, was the earthly link between gods and mortals. Among the countless gods worshipped across Mesopotamia, a few stood above the rest, each with their own temples, festivals, and sacred duties. And Anu, the sky god, father of the heavens, distant and removed, more force than figure. Enlil, the lord of the air, god of storms and kingship. He could be a bringer of blessings or punishment. When Enlil frowned, rivers flooded. Enki, god of water, wisdom, and creation, patron of scribes, magic, and healing. He was the cunning mind behind humanity's survival in many myths. Inanna Ishtar, perhaps the most complex and beloved goddess of love and war, fertility and chaos. She could seduce, destroy, weep, and resurrect. Nana Sin, the moon god, gentle and constant, father of the sun and Inanna. His light guided travelers and inspired dreams. Shamus, the sun god and judge of justice. His rays illuminated truth. He was the god invoked by kings when pronouncing laws. Nergal, god of the underworld, war and plague, feared but necessary. Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, silent and shadowed, ruling over the dead in her dark palace. Each city had its patron deity, and loyalty to one god often reflected local pride. Revered Nana. Nippur held Enlil sacred, and Babylon, naturally, proclaimed Marduk supreme. Religion was interwoven with every part of Mesopotamian life. A farmer would pray before plowing. Merchants invoked protective gods before long journeys. Children learned hymns to Inanna and feared tales of the underworld. Even illness was seen as a spiritual imbalance, a sign of divine displeasure or demonic attack. Temples were not merely places of worship. They were centers of economy, education, and governance. The ziggurat, the towering stepped pyramid at the heart of each sacred precinct, symbolized the bridge between earth and heaven. Priests climbed its levels daily to present offerings, read omens, and maintain the sacred bond. In dreams and divinations, the gods whispered their will. Mesopotamian priests were masters of divinatory arts. They read the entrails of sacrificed animals, tracked the flight of birds, interpreted the movement of stars, and examined patterns in smoke or oil on water. The gods spoke in riddles, in patterns, in shadows. The priesthood's task was to translate the cosmos. Among the most revered of these omens were celestial signs. Astronomy in Babylon was not mere science, it was theology. The path of Venus, Inanna across the sky, the appearance of a comet, the timing of an eclipse, each event held meaning, a message from the heavens. Festivals aligned with agricultural cycles and celestial movements. One of the most important was the Akitu festival, the New Year celebration. It lasted 11 days and involved reenactments of the Enuma Elish, purification rituals, offerings, and the reaffirmation of the king's divine right to rule. Yet for all the splendor of their gods, the Mesopotamians knew the divine was not always kind. Their gods could be capricious, easily angered, and slow to forgive. Floods, droughts, plagues, all were signs of imbalance. To restore harmony, they offered sacrifices, recited spells, and built higher temples. Their world was filled with spirit beings, protective demons like Lamashu with bull bodies and human heads, and harmful ones like Lilu, who stalked the night. Amulets and charms were commonplace. Magic was not superstition, it was survival. But perhaps the most moving tale among their myths is that of Inanna's descent into the underworld. Inanna, proud and luminous, chooses to descend into her sister Ereshkigal's shadowy realm. She must strip herself of all power, her robes, jewelry, and even her crown, at each gate. She is judged, killed, and hung like a piece of meat. But her faithful servant seeks help. Through divine intervention and sacrifice, Inanna is reborn, ascending again, a symbol of renewal, of spring after winter, of life after death. This story was performed in ritual, year after year. It reminded Mesopotamians that even gods fall, but they rise again. Just as the Tigris may flood but recede, just as crops may die but be reborn. Their religion was not one of perfection, but of balance, an eternal dance between chaos and order, light and darkness, life and decay. And so, as Babylon drifted into slumber, the sacred fires flickering low in temple courtyards, one could almost hear the rustle of linen robes, the soft chant of hymns, the breath of gods moving among the stones. For in this land, the divine walked beside the mortal, and the stories of the heavens shaped the lives of men. But not all men welcomed the rule of the gods. Some sought new lands, new paths, and new powers. In the next chapter, we will journey north, to a rising force of steel and stone, to the land of Assyria. As the soft clay tablets of Babylon dried beneath the desert sun, another wind stirred, one that did not carry incense or hymns, but the scent of iron and conquest. It rose from the north, from a rugged land of stone hills and fast rivers, where the winters were harsh and the people even harder. This was Assyria. Nestled between the upper reaches of the Tigris River and the Zagros Mountains, Assyria began humbly, a land of shepherds, hunters, and traders, centered around the city of Ashur, named for its patron god. Ashur, unlike the nurturing Nana or cunning Enki, was a war god, stern and silent, a deity who demanded strength and submission. Assyria's earliest kings ruled not as empire builders, but as caretakers of a small city-state, loyal to Babylon's cultural orbit. But as centuries passed, something shifted. The Assyrians began to look beyond their rocky valleys. Their neighbors, fractured, soft, divided, became targets. And so the Assyrian machine began to awaken. By the second millennium BCE, the kingdom had grown strong, and by the early first millennium, it had become something far greater. The Assyrian Empire, the world's first true military superpower. The Assyrians were not like their Sumerian or Babylonian cousins. Where the south flourished in agriculture and temples, Assyria trained in discipline, engineering, and war. Their armies were terrifyingly efficient. Well-drilled, professional soldiers fought with iron weapons, organized into divisions of infantry, cavalry, archers, and siege specialists. They built massive siege towers, battering rams with iron tips, and mobile bridges to cross moats. They conquered not only by strength, but by sheer ingenuity. Their kings were not only warriors, but propagandists. Stone reliefs adorned palace walls, showing detailed and graphic scenes of victory. Enemies flayed, cities burning, kings begging for mercy. These were not idle threats. They were warnings carved in stone. But behind this terrifying image was a deep, complex civilization. Assyria's capital cities, first Ashur, later Nimrud, Dur-Sharrukin, and finally Nineveh, became centers of incredible sophistication. Grand palaces, aqueducts, and wide roads adorned these cities. Their temples rivaled those of Babylon, and their scribes preserved thousands of texts. Assyria did not reject the culture of the south, it absorbed and reimagined it. The Assyrians worshipped many of the same gods, though Ashur took precedence. They spoke a dialect of Akkadian. Their art was inspired by Sumer and Akkad, though with a colder, sharper edge, more regal, more militant. And their kings were commanders, not mediators. Among them rose some of the most formidable rulers in ancient history. Tiglath-Pileser III, R. 745–727 BCE, who reformed the army and administration. transforming Assyria into a centralized, efficient empire. Sargon IIR, 722–705 BCE, who built the magnificent city of Dur-Sharrukin and led campaigns across Anatolia and the Levant. Sennacherib R, 705–681 BCE, infamous for his brutal siege of Jerusalem and his destruction of Babylon, whose wrath scorched cities into memory. Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, rulers who pushed the empire to its zenith, even conquering Egypt. Under these kings, Assyria stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, encompassing all of Mesopotamia, Syria, Phoenicia, and parts of Anatolia and Egypt. But what made Assyria truly unique was its combination of brutality and bureaucracy. Every province had governors appointed by the king. Roads connected the empire, and mounted couriers carried royal decrees across vast distances. Spies reported disloyalty. Tax systems were codified. Records were kept. Tribute poured in from dozens of subject peoples: gold, silver, timber, grain, and captives. And among the captives were scholars and artisans, relocated to serve the empire. The Assyrians understood that to control a people, one must control their memory and knowledge. No one understood this better than Ashurbanipal R. 668–627 BCE, the last great king of Assyria. Ashurbanipal was both a warrior and a scholar. Though he led campaigns that burned cities and shattered nations, he also built the greatest library the ancient world had ever seen. In the city of Nineveh, he collected over 30,000 tablets, myths, omens, medical texts, hymns, legal documents, and epics. It is because of Ashurbanipal's library that we still have the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish, and countless glimpses into Mesopotamian life. He wrote proudly, "I, Ashurbanipal, king of the world, king of Assyria, I learned the wisdom of the god Nabu, all the scribal arts. I can read the intricate tablets from before the flood." But empires, no matter how vast, do not last forever. In their later years, the Assyrians overextended. Their cruelty bred rebellion. Babylon, long suppressed, rose in fury. The Medes, fierce mountain tribes from Iran, allied with the Babylonians. And in 612 BCE, the unthinkable happened. Nineveh fell. The great city burned for days. Ashurbanipal was dead. His library was buried beneath the ashes, waiting for modern hands to rediscover it millennia later. Assyria, the hammer of the ancient world, was gone. Its fall sent shockwaves through the Near East. From the ruins, a new empire would rise, one that promised peace, beauty, and perhaps redemption. It would be ruled not by Ashur, but by Marduk once more. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was coming. But before we return to Babylon's golden hour, let us pause and imagine the silence after Nineveh's fall, the flames casting shadows on broken walls, the scrolls curling in the heat, and the statues of kings watching, unblinking, as their legacy turned to dust. When Nineveh fell to fire and ash, the silence that followed was not merely the hush of ruin. It was the breath before a rebirth, a slow, golden exhale into a new age. For out of the smoldering corpse of Assyria, Babylon rose again. And this time, it would not rise in shadow. It would rise in splendor. The Neo-Babylonian Empire was not just a revival of old power. It was a reclamation, a conscious effort to restore the cultural soul of Mesopotamia. The torch had passed from Ashur to Marduk, and under the new kings, Babylon would become more than a city. It would become a legend. The architect of this new era was Nebuchadnezzar II, son of Nabopolassar, warrior king, builder of wonders, and the man whose name would echo through biblical scripture and ancient inscription alike. Nebuchadnezzar reigned from 605 to 562 BCE, and under his rule, Babylon became the most glorious city of its time. Let us enter that city now, slowly, with wonder. Imagine approaching from the north, your caravan trailing dust behind you. Rising in the distance is a glint of blue and gold, a colossal gate adorned with lions and bulls, fierce, proud, painted on glazed brick. This is the Ishtar Gate, one of the grandest portals ever built. It leads into the processional way, a wide boulevard lined with walls that shimmer like sapphires in the sun. Lions march down the path beside you, not alive, but carved, symbols of Inanna, goddess of war and love. Babylon stretches out before you, vast and orderly, with streets of brick and roofs of reed and tile. Towering above all is the Etemenenki, the great ziggurat, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Some believe this was the origin of the story of the Tower of Babel, a stairway to the stars. And somewhere, perhaps near the palace, hidden among terraces and cool stone colonnades, there may have been the most whispered-of wonder in the world: the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Though no archaeological proof confirms their existence in Babylon, and some scholars argue they may have belonged to Nineveh, ancient writers from Greece to Persia spoke of them with reverence. A lush paradise of cascading greenery, rising tier upon tier, watered by ingenious irrigation drawn up from the Euphrates. Vines draped over balconies, trees blossomed in the desert heat, and exotic flowers perfumed the air. According to legend, Nebuchadnezzar built them for his wife, Amytis, to ease her homesickness for the green hills of Media. Whether myth or marvel, the gardens symbolize what Nebuchadnezzar wished for Babylon. Not just power, but beauty. Not just empire, but eternity. His reign was not solely one of construction, however. Nebuchadnezzar was also a fierce military strategist. He expanded Babylonian rule deep into the Levant, clashing with Egyptian forces and asserting control over Judea. In 597 BCE, and again in 587 BCE, his forces laid siege to Jerusalem, eventually destroying its temple and exiling thousands of Jews to Babylon. This event, known as the Babylonian captivity, profoundly shaped Jewish history and scripture. It was during this exile that many of the Hebrew Bible's texts were preserved, reflecting on suffering, divine justice, and the strange majesty of a foreign land. The Book of Daniel, for example, tells of a Hebrew captive interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's troubling dreams of towering statues, crumbling kingdoms, and divine judgment. These stories, whether historical or allegorical, immortalized the king in Western memory, as both a tyrant and a symbol of divine fate. Yet within Babylon itself, Nebuchadnezzar was not seen as cruel. He was a restorer, a chosen servant of Marduk, a king of order and prosperity. Under his reign, canals were dredged, walls reinforced, and temples restored. The city pulsed with commerce, ritual, and intellectual life. The empire he helped forge was vibrant, but fragile. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, Babylon quickly fell into turmoil. His successors lacked his vision and strength. Internal dissent grew. And from the east, a new power watched, silent, patient, and utterly different from all who came before: the Persians. Under Cyrus the Great, the Persian Empire moved swiftly. In 539 BCE, they arrived at Babylon's gates. But there was no great siege, no burning city. According to tradition, the gates were opened without a fight. Cyrus entered not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. He proclaimed freedom for the exiled peoples, including the Jews, and honored Marduk in his own way. Babylon, weary of poor leadership, accepted him. The age of Mesopotamian independence had ended, but its culture endured. For centuries more, Babylon would live on under Persian, Greek, and Parthian rule. But it was no longer the beating heart of an empire. Its ziggurat crumbled. The Euphrates shifted. Sand slowly crept in. And yet the dream of Babylon, the image of its gardens, its towers, its night sky prayers and river god hymns, those would survive forever. In myth, in memory, in every tale where men reach too high and gods whisper down. In the next chapter, we'll leave the golden towers and blue gates behind and descend into a quieter but no less vital world: the homes, the hearths, and the daily lives of ordinary Mesopotamians. For while kings may carve stone and reshape rivers, it is in the small rituals of common folk that civilizations truly live. Beyond the thrones of kings and the towers of temples, behind the chiseled reliefs and baked clay laws, there existed another Mesopotamia, quieter, humbler, but no less vital. It was the Mesopotamia of potters and shepherds, scribes and midwives. It breathed in the homes of farmers, in the chants of merchants, and in the lullabies sung over sleeping children. Here, history was not etched in stone, but lived day by day in the rhythm of the river and the turning of the seasons. Let us begin, then, not with war or glory, but with a simple home. A typical Mesopotamian house, whether in Sumer or Babylon, was built of mud brick. The earth itself pressed and dried in the sun, forming sturdy walls that held back heat in the day and cold at night. Roofs were flat, often used as living space during the cooler evenings. The home's layout was practical: a small courtyard at the center, open to the sky, surrounded by rooms for sleeping, storing grain, and preparing food. In these modest homes, life pulsed with steady rhythm. The rising sun might wake a family with the crow of roosters and the call of vendors from the street. Bread would be baked, often flat and unleavened, while dates were pressed into cakes or soaked in milk. If it was a festival day, incense might curl from a small household altar. If it was an ordinary day, the children might gather water, and the adults would set off for their trades. Men and women shared responsibilities, though roles were typically divided by tradition. Men often worked in fields, construction, or as scribes and merchants. Women managed the household, raised children, wove textiles, and even ran businesses or owned property in some cases. Marriage was considered sacred, and contracts were often signed and witnessed, just like any legal agreement. Children were cherished but also expected to learn early. Boys might be sent to Adaba, the scribal school, where they would sit on reed mats, stylus in hand, copying symbols over and over into soft clay. Girls, especially in wealthier families, might learn to read at home or join temple workshops. Workdays followed the rhythm of the Tigris and Euphrates. When the rivers flooded, farmers turned to maintenance and temple duties. When the floods receded, the fields bloomed. Irrigation was everything. Canals, ditches, and sluices fed the crops: barley, wheat, flax, onions, garlic, the lifeblood of the land. Markets were bustling places, full of fishmongers shouting prices, potters shaping spinning clay, shepherds herding goats past spice stalls. The aroma of garlic, roasted lamb, and sweet beer drifted through the dusty air. Mesopotamians brewed beer from barley and flavored it with dates. It was a staple drink, safer than river water, consumed through long straws from communal jars. Evenings brought rest and ritual. Families gathered to eat, to talk, to tell stories by oil lamps. Some homes kept tiny shrines to household gods, protective spirits called Lamashu, or offerings were left to larger deities like Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, or Gyula, goddess of healing. Though daily life was practical, it was also deeply spiritual. Every act had meaning, every season an omen. A strange birth, a missed harvest, an eclipse, these were not random. They were signs, messages from the gods. Diviners read the future in the stars, in the entrails of sheep, in the patterns of smoke. Illness was a mystery, often attributed to spirits or divine displeasure. Priests and healers used incantations, herbs, and prayers to treat the sick. A clay tablet might carry the image of a demon, pierced by nails, a kind of spiritual scapegoat. Life was hard, of course. Infant mortality was high. Droughts and floods could bring famine. Invasions were not uncommon. And yet people endured. They found joy in song, meaning in ritual, and comfort in the eternal cycle of birth, planting, harvest, and death. Death itself was not feared, but understood. The dead were buried beneath homes or in nearby cemeteries. Offerings were left to the spirits of ancestors. They were believed to dwell in the underworld, a shadowy version of life above, neither heaven nor hell, but a place of dust and echoes. There was a Mesopotamian saying, "The house of dust is the final house, where they eat clay and drink dirt." And yet, in their beliefs, if the living remembered and honored the dead, their spirits would rest more peacefully. Festivals offered relief from toil. Throughout the year, cities celebrated with music, dancing, processions, and feasting. During Akitu, the New Year festival in Babylon, statues of the gods were paraded through the streets, hymns filled the air, and plays reenacted ancient myths. It was a time of renewal, when the world was briefly remade, and chaos was driven out. Even the king was humbled during Akitu. He would enter the temple, be stripped of his regalia, and struck by the high priest. If the king's tears were real, Marduk was pleased. It was a reminder. No matter how mighty a ruler became, he was still only a man before the gods. In the humblest corner of this grand civilization, in the act of planting a seed, reading a tablet, or whispering a prayer, we see the heart of Mesopotamia. It was not just the ziggurats or empires that defined it, but the people. The ones who cooked and sang, who wept and loved, who lived in the spaces between the great events of history. And as the night deepens around us, let us pause at the threshold of one such home. The stars twinkle above. A dog barks softly in the alley. Inside, a mother hums an old song as she braids her daughter's hair. The oil lamp flickers, casting shadows on the wall. The river murmurs in the distance, like a lullaby as old as time. This is where the soul of Mesopotamia truly dwelled. In our next chapter, we will shift our gaze upward, toward the skies that guided them and the stars that whispered fate. For the Mesopotamians were among the world's first astronomers, and their night skies were not just beautiful, they were divine maps. Night falls gently over the land between the rivers. The heat of the day fades, and the sky above turns a deep indigo. Stars begin to flicker into view, first a few, then a cascade. For the ancient Mesopotamians, this wasn't merely a backdrop for dreams. It was a scroll of divine signs, a living text in the heavens, written by the hands of gods. Let us walk into this night and look up as they did, not with idle wonder, but with reverent attention. For to the people of Mesopotamia, especially the priests and scholars who served in temples, the stars told stories, foretold disasters, and traced the fates of kings and empires. Mesopotamian astronomy began not as science, but as divination. The night sky was believed to be filled with portents, messages from the gods delivered through the movements of stars, planets, and eclipses. The moon might glow red, a comet might streak across the sky, or Venus might disappear from sight. Each event had a meaning, a warning, a promise. And so, the priests of ancient Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon began to observe. Night after night, year after year, they tracked the stars. They recorded the rising and setting of celestial bodies, mapped constellations, and compiled long lists of omens. Their goal was not curiosity, it was preparation. If one could read the heavens correctly, one could avoid disaster, appease the gods, and guide kings wisely. Over time, this attention gave birth to something astonishing, the first recorded system of astronomy in human history. By the 2nd millennium BCE, Mesopotamian scholars had developed remarkable sophistication. They could predict lunar eclipses, trace the paths of the planets, and even correct their calendars using celestial observations. They understood that the moon followed a cycle of about 29.5 days. They named visible planets. Venus was Ishtar, Mars was Nergal, Jupiter was Marduk, Saturn was Ninurta, and Mercury was Nabu. The stars, too, were grouped into recognizable forms, constellations. The Mesopotamians laid the foundation for what would later become the zodiac. Their path of the moon, called the ecliptic, was divided into 12 parts, each associated with specific star groups and seasonal patterns. Some of these names may feel familiar: the lion, the bull, the twins. These concepts would pass into Greek, Persian, and eventually modern astrological systems. But their roots are right here, beneath the starlit skies of Mesopotamia. Perhaps the most famous contribution was the creation of the Mullapin, a compendium of astronomical knowledge written on clay tablets around 1000 BCE. It catalogued constellations, detailed star risings, and listed planetary behavior. It was a manual for understanding the divine script written in light. But this was no idle exercise. For the Babylonians, astronomy was deeply linked to statecraft and ritual. If a lunar eclipse fell on a certain day, it might signify a coming rebellion. If Venus vanished from the sky for a set number of days, it might foretell a drought. The king's well-being was often thought to depend on the harmony of the heavens. To protect their ruler from ill omens, the Mesopotamians developed a curious ritual: the substitute king. If an eclipse foretold danger to the monarch, a commoner would be crowned temporarily as a dummy king. He would eat royal food, wear the crown, and enjoy brief splendor, and then be quietly removed, taking the curse with him. Such practices remind us of how deeply fear and faith were woven together. The skies were not merely beautiful, they were terrifying in their power. The Mesopotamians did not control the stars, but they sought to understand them, to align themselves with cosmic order. And they passed their knowledge onward. Later civilizations, especially the Greeks, would inherit Mesopotamian astronomy and refine it. The great Greek astronomers, like Hipparchus and Ptolemy, built their models atop foundations laid in Babylon. Even the sexagesimal system, counting in base 60, which we still use to measure time and angles, came from these early stargazers. Imagine, for a moment, a temple scholar atop the ziggurat of Ur. It is late. A torch flickers beside him. He squints at the stars, stylus in hand, marking down the rising of Sirius or the shimmer of Venus. In that simple act, quiet, methodical, lies the first human attempt to measure the infinite. And just as the stars guided kings, they also guided sailors, farmers, and priests. The timing of festivals was often based on celestial cycles. Planting and harvest were aligned with the stars. Even dreams were thought to be shaped by the sky's mood. There is something deeply poetic in this ancient attention to the heavens, a reminder that from the very beginning, humans have sought meaning above. The same stars we see tonight were seen by those scribes, those kings, those children lying on clay roofs in the cool Mesopotamian night. Their myths and meanings may have changed, but the stars remain eternal witnesses to our longing. And now, as we leave the rooftop observatory and descend into silence, we carry with us not just facts, but awe. The awe that drives people to lift their gaze and wonder, what lies beyond? What stories still unfold among the stars? In our next chapter, we'll return to Earth, into the realm of myth and gods, where sky and soil meet in divine drama. We'll explore the rich pantheon of Mesopotamia, the great deities who shaped the world, and the sacred rituals used to honor them. Let us step now from the darkened sky into the warm glow of sacred firelight, into the realm of gods and ritual, of incense and song, where the veil between the human and the divine thinned in the sacred spaces of ancient Mesopotamia. For in this land between rivers, the divine was not distant. The gods were immanent, present in every harvest, every storm, every child's cry. Their moods shaped empires. Their will was law. And to live rightly, to survive, one had to understand and honor the great pantheon. The Mesopotamian world was teeming with deities, hundreds, perhaps thousands. Some were grand cosmic forces, others small household protectors. Every city had its patron god, every craft its divine overseer, every river, grove, and wind its spirit. Life was not secular. It was soaked in sacredness. At the head of this divine assembly stood the great gods of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon, often changing in name or rank through time, but always central to Mesopotamian thought. There was Anu, god of the heavens, distant and serene, the father of all gods. Enlil, the lord of wind and earth, who could bless or destroy with equal power. Enki, later called E, the god of water and wisdom, who lived in the abyss and whispered secrets to mortals. Ninhursag, the mother goddess who shaped life from clay. And Inanna, radiant, fierce, unpredictable goddess of love, war, and the planet Venus. Later, the Babylonians elevated Marduk, the dragon slayer, to supremacy, a reflection of Babylon's rise to power. His myth, recorded in the Enuma Elish, told how he battled the primordial chaos dragon Tiamat, split her body in two, and formed the heavens and the earth. From her eyes flowed the rivers. From her body, the dome of the sky. But the gods did not rule alone from distant realms. They dwelt in temples, living embodiments on earth. Every great city had its ziggurat, a towering step pyramid topped with a shrine. These were not merely monuments. They were believed to be the literal homes of the gods. The temple was the center of the city, both spiritually and economically. Priests tended its rituals. Servants baked bread and prepared offerings. Musicians played harps and lyres, reciting hymns in a sacred language. The god statue was bathed, clothed, fed, and adored daily. These were not symbols. They were believed to contain the deity's essence. To care for the god properly was to ensure prosperity. If the rituals were neglected, if the offerings were poor, the god might grow angry. Famine might follow, or plague, or invasion. Thus, ritual precision became a sacred duty. Temples held enormous power. They owned land, employed laborers, collected tribute. In many cities, the temple was the largest employer and the keeper of knowledge. Scribes trained there. Laws were recorded. Stars were watched. Worship, too, was not only for priests. Common people brought votive figurines, left food, whispered prayers. If a child was sick, if a journey was long, if a marriage was at risk, a person might visit a temple and offer libations, incense, or silver. Rituals marked the turning of seasons. The planting of barley, the first full moon, the rising of a certain star, all were times of sacred ceremony. One of the most profound was the hieros gamos, or sacred marriage rite. In this ritual, the king would symbolically marry the goddess Inanna, often through a high priestess. It was a ceremony of renewal, reenacting divine union to bring fertility to the land. Through these acts, the king became more than a man. He was a divinely sanctioned shepherd, chosen to uphold cosmic order. But the gods were not always kind. They could be jealous, vengeful, unpredictable, much like the natural forces they governed. To explain disasters, people turned to the gods' anger. Earthquakes, drought, and disease were interpreted as punishments for ritual failure or moral transgression. To ward off misfortune, elaborate exorcisms and ritual purifications were practiced. Priests known as Ashapu and Baru specialized in diagnosis and remedy, not with medicine alone, but with chants, amulets, and invocations. Evil spirits were named, mocked, cast out. Protective figurines were buried beneath doorways. Sacred texts prescribed long sequences of prayers and offerings for every imaginable ill. Death itself was understood within this divine framework. The soul journeyed to the underworld, known as Kur or Urkala, a place of shadows ruled by the fearsome goddess Ereshkigal. There, the dead lived in silence, feeding on dust, unless remembered and honored by the living. Ancestor rituals were held regularly, and neglecting one's dead was considered deeply shameful. But not all spiritual power lay in gods and ghosts. Mesopotamian magic was rich and complex, a blend of prayer, incantation, symbol, and ritual. There were spells for fertility, for protection, for love, for victory. There were curses, too, inscribed on tablets, buried with figurines, sealed with wax and hidden beneath thresholds. And always, above and below, there was the balance, the eternal dance between chaos and order, light and shadow, mortal and divine. In this sacred system, humans had a role, not as rulers, but as servants of the gods. Life was about duty, reverence, and gratitude. By participating in the proper rites, by honoring the gods with sincerity and precision, Mesopotamians believed they could hold back the dark. And so they sang. Their hymns, etched into clay, still echo across time. Songs to Inanna, to Shamash, to Ishtar, voices raised thousands of years ago, still decipherable today. In one hymn, Inanna is called, Lady of Largest Heart, who gathers the meadows like a divine cloak, who walks among the stars with flaming crown. In those lines, and in the quiet temples lit by oil lamps, we hear the heartbeat of a civilization, reverent, poetic, unafraid to reach toward the unknown. As we now leave the sacred precincts and step into the realm of legacy, we begin to ask, what remains? In the next chapter, we'll walk through time to the fall of great cities, the rise of new empires, and the quiet endurance of Mesopotamia's memory. Even as dust settled over its temples, its spirit moved onward, carried by scribes, stones, and story. Empires, like rivers, rise and fall, carving the land, nourishing life, then slowly fading into the earth from which they came. The story of Mesopotamia is not just one of glory and grandeur, of mighty gods and soaring ziggurats. It is also the story of decline, of cities that turned to dust, of languages that faded from lips, and of once-proud kings whose names are now whispered only in the quiet corners of stone tablets. Let us walk through the twilight of ancient Mesopotamia. By the time Babylon had reached its zenith under kings like Hammurabi in the 18th century BCE, cracks were already beginning to form in the foundation. Overuse of farmland, salinization of soil from repeated irrigation, and growing economic disparities began to weaken the social fabric. Famine became more frequent. The gods were petitioned, but the skies did not always answer. As the centuries passed, a cycle emerged, one as predictable as the turning of seasons. A great city would rise, Ur, Akkad, Babylon, Nineveh. It would flourish for a few centuries, then suffer invasion, rebellion, drought, or economic collapse. A new power would rise in its place, sometimes learning from the old, sometimes erasing it. The fall of Akkad, for instance, is still shrouded in mystery. Founded by the great Sargon in the 24th century BCE, it became the first true empire in recorded history. But within 200 years, it had collapsed, perhaps due to internal strife, perhaps due to an extended drought that dried the rivers and cracked the fields. In the south, Ur would rise in its place, ushering in a cultural revival. Its third dynasty built vast administrative systems, great temples, and glorious literature, including the earliest law codes and the epic poetry that inspired later works. But it too fell, around 2000 BCE, to invading Amorites and pressure from the expanding Elamites of Iran. Then came Babylon. The Babylonian Empire under Hammurabi brought a degree of unity, codified law, infrastructure, diplomacy. But even this order was temporary. In 1595 BCE, the city was sacked by the Hittites, who marched down from Anatolia, leaving destruction in their wake. The pattern repeated. Assyria rose in the north, warlike, efficient, brutal. Its kings, like Ashurbanipal and Tiglath-Pileser, built vast libraries and road systems, but also conducted campaigns of ruthless conquest. At its height, the Assyrian Empire stretched from Egypt to the Persian Gulf. Yet even Assyria could not withstand the tides. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes swept into Nineveh, reducing its palaces to rubble. Eyewitnesses wrote of fire-consuming libraries, of walls that crumbled beneath the flood of siege. Babylon rose again under Nebuchadnezzar II, its hanging gardens famed, its architecture gleaming. But within a century, the Persians arrived. Led by Cyrus the Great, the Achaemenid Empire conquered Babylon in 539 BCE without a battle. Cyrus entered the city not as a destroyer, but as a liberator, honoring Babylon's gods, restoring temples, and issuing the famous Cyrus Cylinder, which some scholars call the first human rights declaration. Still, Babylon was no longer the heart of the world. Power shifted eastward to Persepolis and Susa, then westward to Alexander the Great, who marched into Mesopotamia in 331 BCE. He defeated Darius III at the Battle of Gaugamela and entered Babylon in triumph. For a brief moment, the city became his imperial capital. Then Alexander died, and chaos followed. The Seleucids, the Parthians, and finally the Sassanids would rule Mesopotamia. By the time Rome and Persia clashed over these lands in the early centuries CE, the ancient cities had either vanished or become mere provincial outposts. Ur was buried beneath sand. Akkad's location was lost to time. Babylon, once the marvel of the world, became a ghost of stone and memory. And yet, Mesopotamia never truly died. Its echoes remained, woven into the civilizations that followed. The Assyrians' road systems would inspire Roman infrastructure. The Babylonian concept of law and order, with Hammurabi's principle of an eye for an eye, would echo in later legal traditions. Their mathematics, with its base 60 system, still governs our clocks. Their astronomical records informed Greek and Islamic scholars for centuries. Even their myths endured. The Epic of Gilgamesh, forgotten for millennia, was rediscovered in the 19th century on broken clay tablets in the ruins of Nineveh. There, we read of a hero's quest for immortality, his grief, his pride, and his reckoning with mortality, themes that resonate across time. So what, then, do we learn from the fall of Mesopotamian empires? We learn that no empire is eternal, not even those with divine kings and thousand-year cities. We learn that drought can humble a nation, that scribes and soldiers must both bow to the turning of the earth, and that even in ruin there is legacy. For every toppled ziggurat, there remained a line of poetry. For every broken statue, a hidden tablet. The dust did not erase the story, it preserved it. And so, as we stand in the silent remains of Babylon, wind curling through broken gates, we feel not just sorrow, but continuity. The Mesopotamians did not vanish. They became part of us, their ideas stitched into our thoughts, their gods into our stories, their cities into our bones. In the final section of our journey, we will walk among these modern echoes. We'll explore how Mesopotamia's spirit lives on, in language, in law, in culture, and why the first cradle of civilization still whispers in our ears. As we arrive at the final chapter of our long and winding journey, we step softly, not into the ruins of ancient cities or the chambers of forgotten gods, but into our own world. And yet, everywhere we look, Mesopotamia lingers. Its whispers rise in the architecture of our cities, echo in the laws that govern our lives, hum gently beneath the rhythm of our calendars and clocks. Though its bricks may crumble and its language lie buried, the ideas of Mesopotamia endure, quietly, profoundly, shaping the very way we think, live, and dream. Let's pause in this gentle twilight of the story and see how the cradle of civilization still rocks us today. Language and writing. The birth of the written word, it all began with a simple need: to remember. The earliest records, grain tallies, trade agreements, were pressed into clay using a sharpened reed. This became cuneiform, the first writing system. And with writing came memory, law, poetry, and history. The concept of recording knowledge, of storytelling in written form, this began in Mesopotamia. Law and order. The roots of Justice Hammurabi's code, etched into stone nearly 4,000 years ago, was a vision of fairness, of a society ruled by laws, not whim. While we don't follow the code today, the principles behind it still shape modern legal systems. Justice, accountability, fairness, these seeds were sown in Babylon. Science and time. Measuring the heavens, Mesopotamian priests watched the skies with unmatched dedication. They mapped the stars, tracked eclipses, and created a calendar of 12 months. They divided time into hours, minutes, and seconds, a base 60 system we still use today. Every glance at a clock is a quiet nod to their legacy. The birth of cities. Before Mesopotamia, people lived in villages. Afterward, they lived in cities, planned, organized, connected. Uruk, Babylon, these were models for how humans could live together in complexity. Temples, markets, roads, and homes all coexisted. Our modern cities owe their foundations to these ancient blueprints. Literature and myth. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of humanity's oldest stories, a tale of kingship, friendship, loss, and the search for meaning. Mesopotamian myths influenced countless later traditions. Their poetic voices still echo in the structure of modern stories, from epic quests to personal reflection. Spiritual thought. Though their gods are no longer worshipped, the Mesopotamians introduced many ideas that shaped later faiths. The struggle between good and evil, divine justice, creation myths, and moral codes. These concepts passed from temple walls into religious texts that millions follow today. Rediscovery and memory. For centuries, Mesopotamia was forgotten. But in the 1800s, archaeologists uncovered its ruins and began to decipher its clay tablets. What they found changed our understanding of human history, revealing that civilization began far earlier and far more brilliantly than we had believed. And now you know too. You've walked beside Sumerian priests and Babylonian kings. You've listened to the scribes, watched the ziggurats rise, and felt the wind over broken stones. The rivers may have shifted course. The gods may have fallen silent, but the legacy remains. So as you drift into sleep tonight, know this. The first chapter of our shared story was written between the Tigris and Euphrates. And though time has turned pages, the story has never ended. Thank you for being here with me. Sleep peacefully. Sherry.